Ladies and gentlemen, here's where things stand on day 13 of this major Middle East conflict, a war that has grown far beyond the initial strikes to touch economies, cultures, and geopolitics around the world. We're now nearly 2 weeks into a war that began with highly coordinated U.S. and Israeli air campaigns against Iran. Those strikes targeted military facilities, infrastructure, and, according to multiple international reporting agencies, even leadership compounds. In retaliation, Iran has launched a mix of missile and drone attacks against Israeli territory and U.S. bases in the Gulf region, while engaging allied militias, further widening the map of combat. And let's be clear about something that's too easy to overlook. This is not a contained regional skirmish anymore. The impact of this conflict is hitting civilian lives and civilian infrastructure hard. Historic sites and cultural treasures, some dating back centuries, have been damaged in the crossfire, stirring outcry from human rights and heritage organizations globally. Millions of ordinary people have seen their lives upended, from destroyed homes in Iranian cities to airspace closures in nearby countries, and thousands of flight cancellations that ripple into economies far beyond the region. Global supply chains are stretched, shipping lanes are threatened, and oil prices have surged as one of the world's most vital shipping choke points. The Strait of Hormuz teeters on the brink of paralysis. And yet, despite the very real human and economic tolls, we have leaders on all sides preaching resolve over retreat. Statements from capitals in Washington, Tehran, and Jerusalem echo with rhetoric about national will, strategic necessity, and long-term objectives, even as damage mounts on all fronts. So what does this day teach us? First, that modern warfare doesn't stay on battlefields. It reverberates through markets, cultures, and everyday lives. Second, that conflict between states with global reach doesn't just affect their borders, it reshapes global political calculations and economic vulnerabilities. And third, that clarity is still elusive. Diplomacy hasn't yet prevailed over force, and the human cost continues to rise. As of the 13th day of the ongoing military conflict between the United States and Israel on one side and the Islamic Republic of Iran on the other, what we're seeing is not a contained or brief confrontation, but a full-blown escalation that has reverberated across the Middle East and beyond. The war erupted on February 28, 2026, when Israel and the United States launched concerted and coordinated air and missile strikes deep inside Iran, hitting multiple cities and strategic military sites simultaneously. These strikes were so significant that they led to the death of Iran's supreme leader and other senior officials in Tehran, an extraordinary development in modern geopolitics and a dramatic escalation after years of simmering tensions rooted in disputes over nuclear programs, ballistic missiles, and regional influence. From the outset, Iran responded with its own missile and drone barrages targeting Israeli territory and U.S. military bases in the Gulf region. What started as aerial bombardment has quickly expanded into a multi-dimensional conflict involving naval maneuvers, drone warfare, and cyber operations across a theater that stretches from the Persian Gulf to the Levant. Civilian populations on both sides have been affected, and major cities have endured explosions and air raid alerts. This isn't just a clash of capitals, it's a war that has spilled into the everyday lives of millions of people. Diplomatically, this conflict has upended any efforts at stability. Global mediation attempts have struggled to keep pace with the rapid military dynamics. Despite calls from regional powers to halt the fighting, both Washington and Tel Aviv have offered defiant tones, signaling they're prepared to continue military operations until strategic goals are met. In parallel, Iran has defiantly refused to capitulate or withdraw, even as its own infrastructure and military capabilities have been degraded. On the ground, we are seeing an escalation that goes well beyond traditional front lines. Proxy forces aligned with Iran, including militia groups across Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, have intensified their attacks on U.S. and Israeli targets. Meanwhile, both Iran's military and its regional allies have utilized drones, rockets, and missile salvos to maintain pressure and retaliate, broadening the geographical footprint of this war. Civilians are increasingly caught in the crossfire, displacement is rising, and cities across the Middle East are bracing for continued instability. In essence, Day 13 marks not just another day of conflict, but a pivotal moment where a regional crisis has taken on global significance, militarily, politically, and economically, drawing in not just the nations directly involved, but entire alliances and critical international interests. The war between the United States, Israel, and Iran, now on its 13th day, has expanded far beyond the borders of the countries directly involved, creating a regional escalation that threatens the stability of the entire Middle East. What began as a targeted strike campaign within Iran quickly evolved into a multi-layered conflict with repercussions in neighboring countries and key international shipping lanes. Iran has demonstrated that its response capabilities extend well beyond its own territory, launching drone and missile strikes into Israel, targeting infrastructure and military positions. These attacks have been met with retaliatory strikes by Israel on Iranian-aligned forces in Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, creating a pattern of cross-border engagements that shows just how interconnected the theaters of conflict have become. The war has effectively transformed into a network of simultaneous fronts where actions in one country trigger reactions in several others. Civilian populations in neighboring countries are increasingly affected. In Bahrain, for example, drone strikes targeting fuel depots and airport facilities have not only caused physical damage but also heightened fears of spillover into other Gulf states. Shipping lanes in the Persian Gulf, particularly near the Strait of Hormuz, have become high-risk zones as Iranian-aligned naval forces have threatened commercial vessels, prompting increased patrols by international coalitions. This has led to disruptions in the global supply of energy resources, further illustrating how the war's impact transcends local borders and touches the global economy. The escalation is not only geographic, but technological, with cyber attacks and electronic warfare being reported against critical infrastructure in multiple countries, including attempts to disrupt communications and energy grids in Israel and U.S. allied territories. Proxy groups play a critical role in this cross-border escalation. Hezbollah in Lebanon and other Iranian-aligned militias have launched rockets and drones against Israeli targets in a show of solidarity with Tehran, while Iranian forces have engaged in skirmishes along Iraq's borders. These actions create a web of conflict that pulls third-party states into the fray, forcing regional powers to reassess security arrangements and military readiness. International actors, including the European Union and the United Nations, have expressed concern over the widening of the conflict, emphasizing the risk of the war becoming a protracted regional confrontation. Economic consequences are also manifesting across borders. Airspace closures and disrupted shipping routes have caused delays in commercial logistics, pushing oil and gas prices higher and affecting markets in Europe, Asia, and North America. Insurance premiums for maritime transport have skyrocketed, reflecting the perceived risk of operating in waters near the Persian Gulf. The cumulative effect is that this war, while initially centered in Iran, has spread its influence far beyond national borders, drawing in multiple actors, destabilizing nearby countries, and signaling a new level of regional volatility. One of the most concerning aspects of the ongoing conflict between the United States, Israel, and Iran is the scale of civilian and cultural damage being reported as the war enters its 13th day. While the initial military operations were focused on strategic military installations, intelligence facilities, and leadership compounds, the reality of modern warfare has meant that civilian areas have increasingly been caught in the crossfire. Urban centers in Iran have experienced repeated aerial bombardments that have affected homes, schools, hospitals, and other critical civilian infrastructure. Reports from humanitarian organizations indicate that thousands of families have been displaced, forced to leave their homes in search of safety, and with limited access to food, water, and medical care. The destruction of civilian infrastructure not only impacts immediate survival needs, but also threatens the long-term stability of communities by disrupting essential services such as electricity, water supply, and healthcare. Beyond human casualties and displacement, there is significant concern over the destruction of cultural heritage sites. Iran is home to centuries-old historical landmarks, including UNESCO World Heritage Sites, ancient mosques, and archaeological ruins. Airstrikes and collateral damage have led to the partial or total destruction of some of these sites, prompting international outcry from organizations dedicated to the preservation of cultural history. These sites are not only irreplaceable in terms of historical value, but they also serve as symbols of national identity and pride for the Iranian people. Damage to such landmarks can have profound psychological effects on the population, contributing to a sense of loss and collective trauma that goes beyond the immediate physical destruction. Hospitals and emergency response systems are under extreme pressure. Medical facilities have been overwhelmed with casualties from both military operations and indirect effects such as fires, structural collapses, and accidents related to damaged infrastructure. Access to medical supplies is limited due to transport disruptions caused by airspace restrictions, military checkpoints, and damaged logistics networks. Humanitarian aid organizations face enormous challenges in reaching affected populations safely, and the destruction of roads and bridges further complicates the delivery of essential services. In addition to the immediate human and cultural toll, the destruction of civilian infrastructure and heritage sites has broader implications for Iran's economy, tourism, and international relations. The targeting of urban centers and cultural landmarks risks isolating the country further while creating long-lasting scars on the population's social fabric. The war has thus extended beyond conventional military objectives, highlighting the devastating collateral consequences that affect everyday life, social cohesion, and cultural memory, with long-term impacts likely to resonate for years to come. One of the most significant consequences of the ongoing war between the United States, Israel, and Iran is the global economic shockwave that has rippled through markets, trade networks, and energy supply chains since the conflict began. Iran sits at the center of several critical global infrastructures, most notably the Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly a fifth of the world's oil passes. With military operations escalating in and around Iranian territory, shipping lanes in the Persian Gulf have become increasingly dangerous. Commercial vessels, including oil tankers, have faced heightened threats from missile strikes, drone attacks, and naval blockades, leading to insurance premiums skyrocketing and shipping companies rerouting vessels, which significantly increases transit times and costs. These disruptions are reverberating globally, affecting energy prices in Europe, Asia, and North America, and causing market volatility as investors react to the uncertainty in one of the world's most strategically important regions. Oil prices have surged due to fears of supply shortages, with crude benchmarks reaching levels not seen in years. The instability has triggered inflationary pressures in countries heavily dependent on imported energy, increasing costs for transportation, manufacturing, and household consumption. Beyond oil, the war has affected natural gas exports, petrochemical production, and even shipping insurance markets, demonstrating how interconnected the modern global economy is with regional conflicts. International corporations are forced to assess operational risk, with some temporarily suspending projects or relocating staff away from conflict zones. This ripple effect reaches industries that may seem indirectly connected to the war, including aviation, insurance, finance, and even consumer goods, highlighting how a military conflict in one region can produce economic shockwaves far beyond its borders. Stock markets have also responded to the uncertainty, showing heightened volatility as investors weigh the potential impacts of sustained hostilities. Financial markets react not only to immediate risks, but also to predictions about how long the conflict may last, potential sanctions, and the broader geopolitical ramifications for international trade. The war has created challenges for central banks and policymakers who must balance measures to stabilize economies while addressing rising energy prices and market uncertainties. Additionally, countries dependent on Middle Eastern energy exports have had to consider strategic reserves and alternative supply routes, further complicating global trade logistics. International organizations have issued warnings about the potential for the conflict to exacerbate food and energy insecurity in vulnerable regions as shipping disruptions affect the delivery of essential commodities. The cumulative effect is a complex global economic landscape in which localized military operations have consequences that extend far beyond national borders, influencing financial markets, trade stability, and daily life in multiple continents. One of the defining characteristics of the conflict between the United States, Israel, and Iran is the role of proxy forces, which has significantly intensified the scale and complexity of the war. From the earliest days of the conflict, it became clear that Iran was not relying solely on its conventional military forces to respond to U.S. and Israeli strikes. Instead, Tehran has mobilized a network of proxy militias and allied groups across the Middle East, including Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Iraq, and various factions in Syria. These groups have launched coordinated attacks against Israeli targets, utilizing rockets, drones, and other unconventional weaponry to extend the battlefield far beyond Iran's borders. This strategy not only enables Iran to exert military pressure without committing its full conventional forces directly, but it also complicates the response for Israel and the United States, creating multiple simultaneous conflict zones. Hezbollah, for instance, has been particularly active in southern Lebanon, targeting Israeli border areas with a series of rocket attacks. These assaults have prompted retaliatory strikes by the Israeli Defense Forces, creating a tit-for-tat escalation cycle that increases the likelihood of further regional involvement. In Iraq, Iran-aligned militias have targeted U.S. military bases and convoys with missile and drone attacks, raising concerns about the conflict spreading into neighboring countries. Syrian territories have similarly become battlegrounds, with both Iranian-backed militias and Israeli airstrikes operating in contested zones, demonstrating how proxy groups can transform national conflicts into regional wars with multiple front lines. The use of proxies also introduces a high degree of unpredictability. Unlike conventional armies, these militias often operate independently, sometimes pursuing local agendas alongside the strategic objectives set by Iran. This makes it difficult for U.S. and Israeli forces to anticipate attacks, respond effectively, implement diplomatic measures. Furthermore, the involvement of proxy groups increases the risk of civilian casualties, as many of these militias are embedded in urban or densely populated areas. Humanitarian organizations have reported rising civilian displacement and damage to residential neighborhoods, highlighting the secondary consequences of proxy warfare. Beyond the immediate military implications, proxy escalation has serious geopolitical consequences. It draws other regional actors into the conflict, forces countries such as Jordan, Egypt, and Gulf states to reassess their security postures, and heightens the risk of wider regional instability. The proliferation of drones, rockets, and other technologies among these groups also sets a precedent for future conflicts, potentially empowering non-state actors in ways that could persist long after the current war concludes. One of the most striking aspects of the ongoing war between the United States, Israel, and Iran is the level of political posturing and defiance displayed by all parties involved. From the very beginning of the conflict, the leaders of each country have used public statements, speeches, and media appearances not only to communicate strategy, but also to signal resolve and determination to domestic and international audiences. In Washington, Officials have emphasized that the United States is fully committed to supporting its allies in the region and to preventing Iran from expanding its influence through military or nuclear capabilities. This messaging is carefully calibrated to show strength and unity, reassuring allies while deterring adversaries from miscalculating American intentions. Public statements often emphasize that the U.S. will continue military operations until strategic objectives are met, signaling that there is little willingness to negotiate under pressure at this stage. In Israel, political leaders have mirrored this approach, reinforcing the idea that national security is paramount and that no concessions will be made in response to Iranian attacks. Israeli officials have highlighted the readiness and technological sophistication of their defense systems, particularly missile intercept capabilities and intelligence networks, as evidence of their ability to respond to threats. This serves both to reassure citizens amid air alerts and to warn Iran and its allies that military aggression will meet a robust response. Israeli rhetoric has also emphasized historical narratives and national identity, framing the conflict as not only a defense of territory but also a protection of national sovereignty against external threats. Meanwhile, Iran's leadership has projected defiance both domestically and internationally, framing the conflict as a struggle against foreign interference and aggression. Tehran has used state media and public addresses to portray U.S. and Israeli actions as unjust and provocative, rallying public support around nationalistic and religious narratives. Statements from Iran have consistently emphasized resilience, promising that any damage inflicted on infrastructure or military assets will be met with retaliation, often highlighting the capabilities of Iran's missile program and regional proxies. These messages are intended to bolster morale, deter further attacks, and maintain the image of an unyielding state under siege. The combined effect of this political posturing is the reinforcement of a cycle of escalation. Each side's defiant rhetoric not only communicates strategic intent, but also hardens public perception, making compromise more difficult and heightening tensions. International observers note that such messaging can influence diplomatic efforts, signaling that concessions are unlikely and that each party is prepared for sustained confrontation. This defiance is therefore not merely symbolic. It shapes both the conduct of military operations and the broader geopolitical environment, creating a war that is as much about perception and signaling as it is about conventional battlefield outcomes. As we reflect on the 13th day of this conflict, it becomes clear that what began as a localized military operation has evolved into a complex, multidimensional crisis with far-reaching consequences. The escalation beyond Iran's borders, the targeting of civilian populations and cultural landmarks, and the deployment of proxy forces illustrate that modern warfare extends well beyond traditional battlefields. The human cost, both immediate and long-term, is compounded by the destruction of infrastructure and disruption of basic services, affecting millions of lives. At the same time, the global economy is being reshaped by energy disruptions, trade instability, and market volatility, showing how interconnected our world is and how swiftly regional conflicts can have global repercussions. Political posturing and defiance by all parties have entrenched positions and signaled that neither side is willing to retreat, making diplomacy more challenging while simultaneously amplifying the stakes of every action taken. Civilian suffering, proxy engagements, and escalating retaliation underscore the dangerous potential for this war to widen, drawing in additional regional actors and further destabilizing the Middle East. Emerges from this analysis is a sobering understanding the consequences of this conflict are human, cultural, economic, and geopolitical, and its resolution will require more than military strategy. It will demand careful diplomacy, international coordination, and sustained attention to both immediate humanitarian needs and the long-term stability of the region. This conflict, now on its 13th day, is a reminder that in modern warfare, no nation, city, or population exists in isolation, and the ripples of military action extend far beyond the front lines, shaping the lives of civilians and the global order alike.